You know that you're becoming a bit of an old head home barista when you start to measure the passing of time, not on the calendar, but more so through versions of coffee gear. Because it was about 10 years ago I got my first Baratza Encore, still working by the way, about 3 years ago when I tested the first version of the ESP, and now today we're looking at the newest version, the Baratza Encore ESP PRO, which was announced and showcased at this year's Specialty Coffee Expo. And while I was there, I actually got a full breakdown, which in turn earned it a coveted spot in my top 5 gear picks of the entire show. But this new version didn't land on the list purely based on nostalgia alone. For one, it's espresso capable, hence the ESP, but it can also grind for other coarser filter applications. It's advertised as stepless, quieter than the original or previous versions, and has anti-static tech built in, as well as a good number of other quality of life and workflow related updates. So in this video, we're going to be digging into what's new and notable on the ESP Pro. Of course, looking at its performance and its downsides, and seeing if it's worth the $100 price bump from its predecessor. But first, in the spirit of full disclosure, the folks over at Baratza did give me this grinder, but of course agreed to my terms of no access to my draft or the contents of this video prior to full public release. With all that out of the way, we're going to dive right into it after a quick word from this video's sponsor. If you're into coffee, its culture, and learning about the world around it, Standart magazine is the perfect addition to your brew bar or coffee table. With quarterly releases, they shed light on issues both inside and outside of the cafe, highlighting people who elevate the industry, and deep dives into new ideas around all things coffee. To sweeten the deal even further, each issue also includes a sample of coffee from some of the best roasters on the planet, to give you the full sensory experience. You really can't beat the combination of fresh coffee and fresh print. So head on over to standartmag.com/Sprometheus or use code Sprometheus at checkout to snag $5 off your very own subscription of coffee and culture, shipped direct to your door nearly anywhere in the world. And if you're still on the fence, you actually try Standart today for just the cost of shipping. There's not a whole lot to lose, and there's a whole lot to gain. At first glance, the ESP Pro does look very similar to its predecessor, but there are some significant differences if you look a bit closer, both inside and out. Up top, you can see that they've finally updated the hopper, which now has a shutoff valve, which just so happened to be one of my main complaints with the original ESP. So now you can swap coffees, switch to the included single dose system, or clean things out much easier than before. Also, the collar around the dosing funnel is still the adjustment ring, but now it moves without steps, which should allow for more precision, especially when dialing in espresso, which also just so happened to be one of my main critiques of the original ESP. The body of the grinder has also been updated with a slightly different shape. It's got a higher end look, and more importantly, a higher quality feel. On its face, there's a simple and easy to read heads-up display, which not only tracks your grind setting, even showing when you enter or leave their designated espresso range, but also functions as a timer when using it in its grind by time mode, or as just a grind time alone when running it as a single doser. And they've also replaced the basic switch on the side to a single activation button/dial combination to run all of the grind and timing features. As we move inside, just above the burrs is a removable flow control disc, which avoids potential jamming, crowding, and regrinding in the chamber. Below the disc sits the 40mm M2 conical burrs made by Etzinger and used in the previous ESP model. And also, similarly to the standard ESP, they spin the burrs at 550 RPM. The grinds themselves are then dropped into the original bin, or now included dosing cup, same as the ESP, after passing through the newly added deionizer aimed at reducing static and clumping. Much like the original ESP, the Pro isn't breaking any new ground, though it is simple to use and effective. As I mentioned earlier, the grinder can be used in either a grind by time format using the included hopper, or as a single doser, which is my personal preference. The grind by time setting, though, is just that. You set the time and it does the grind. And even though this isn't my favorite method of grinding, it does work rather effectively and shuts off quickly. After running a few back-to-back doses once beans have been fed into the chamber, it is pretty accurate, producing a max variance of just under half a gram, not counting any potential retained grinds, which is a topic we'll get into more later. When using it as a single dose grinder, its workflow is pretty simple, as it employs an automatic shutoff and detects when no more beans are in the chamber, allowing you time to do other prep without having to manually stop it. In terms of the grind retention, it didn't seem to outperform the original ESP, and as is a common issue, the grind's retained increases as the adjustments get finer, even after a few taps on the grinder itself. Though when utilizing a spritz of water, the retention numbers improved significantly. And the grinds themselves are nice and fluffy, but for espresso, I still do a bit of stirring and breaking up prior to brewing because I do that regardless of the grinder. But I think this is actually a great segue into talking about the overall qualities and quality of the coffee brewed from the ESP Pro. And surprise, surprise, the flavor profiles are all but exactly the same as the previous ESP, but considering the burrs and their speed is exactly the same, this isn't all that shocking. That said though, in terms of both espresso and filter applications, the coffee is well balanced, full-bodied, and well extracted. And over the last couple of months, I would pull random brews to test their extraction yields, and I didn't really see any drop below 19%, even on lighter, denser roasts. On top of that, these burrs continue to be some of the most forgiving in terms of having a wider sweet spot across varying roasts and origins, especially with more traditional brew ratios on both espresso and filter. And the addition of the stepless adjustment allows for a truer dial-in. As I found on espresso testing, the difference in espresso shot time between a half and a whole point is about 1 second up against the stepped ESP, which was closer to 3 seconds. Considering Baratza went out and fixed basically everything I directly complained about on the previous ESP, I was concerned I wouldn't find much to talk about in this section, but as we've learned over the years, nothing is perfect. For example, it was mentioned at Expo that the grinder was designed to be quieter than the ESP, and it is, but only just so. This is not what I would consider a meaningful difference. Also, directly out of the box, the grinder was far too coarse to make even a standard espresso, as it still ran fast, even at the finest setting, which happened to put a damper on my coffee that morning when I had to open up the grinder, remove the burrs, the sweeper, install the 2 additional shims that were actually packed in the box, to then get the grinder to perform as expected. Though not a big deal and a relatively easy fix, when the espresso range is 0 to 40, I'd expect the grinder to be shipped with these shims in place and capable of running a pretty basic 18 gram 1:2 ratio shot straight out of the box. And after a bit of research, it did seem like this was a problem that occurred even with the original ESP, where some folks had inconsistent numbers of shims installed at arrival and essentially had very different brewing results on the same grind settings. So this is something they seem to be obviously aware of because it comes shipped with extra shims, but I just like to see that be just a bit more consistent out of the factory. At this point, I think I'm at risk of sounding a bit repetitive, but much like the ESP, I would say the Pro is a welcome addition to the entry-ish or upper entry-level market. And I say that because at $300, it does constitute a $100 jump in price point. And this increase in price doesn't, at least in my experience, improve the coffee ground or brewed, but it does add a lot of quality of life and workflow features that make it cleaner and overall a better experience to use. Though, of course, as always, I'm going to stop short of telling anyone how to spend their money, and instead, it's up to the individual and their budget to decide if those features and upgrades are worth the extra cost when it comes to buying a grinder. But it is clear to me that Baratza listened to their customer base and made meaningful changes that I'm sure not only made it into my original review of the ESP, but other users' home experiences as well. But on that note, I think it's time I start wrapping this one up, and as always, pass the conversations on to you. So what are your thoughts on the Baratza ESP versus the ESP Pro? Do you think those changes are good enough for a $100 price bump, or do you think not enough is different? Drop your answers to those questions and any others you may have in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see y'all in the next video. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that little bell button for notifications when new videos drop. Check out my Instagram at Sprometheus for more coffee content. Help support the channel by considering becoming a member. And as always, stay caffeinated. Pony Boy.